Coming up on the Paper Talk today, we're looking at how Sir Jim Ratcliffe's ownership of Manchester United will look and when is it going to happen. And also, could it lead to a European ban? Could Manchester United be getting banned from Europe because Sir Jim Ratcliffe owns a stake in the club? Let's check it out. Jay here from Stretford, Paddock. This is the Paper Talk. As you can see, I'm outside Old Trafford and it's a bit cold and it looks like it might be starting to rain, so make sure you've got your parkers on. Loads of stories to get through concerning Manchester United this morning, so we'll crack on. There's a story here doing the rounds about United potentially facing a European ban, which sounds very dramatic, doesn't it? But I'll explain what it is, because a lot of people are looking at it and going, what? Ban from Europe? For what? How's that work? Well, this story, and it's been in a few papers. I've seen it in the Manchester Evening News. I've seen it in the Star. I think it might have originated actually from the Sun. Hashtag don't buy the Sun. So you can maybe take this with a pinch of salt. But when it concerns rules and regulations, we'll get into it to see if we can unpick the bones of it. It says here in the Evening News, United could be banned from playing in Europe following Sir Jim Ratcliffe investment. Sir Jim Ratcliffe's ownership of Nice could see United banned from playing in Europe next season. It says, under UEFA's multi-club ownership rules, the only way United and Nice can both play in Europe in the next campaign is if one seals an automatic Champions League spot and the other qualifies directly for the Conference League. If both finish in the Champions League spots in their respective divisions, the team that finishes higher of the two gets the place with the other banned from Europe. Now, you look at that and you think, what? And it says here, the UEFA source quoted saying, as the rule stands, it is a clear situation. Ineos owns Nice and are set to have a significant role in running United. Unless the regulations are changed or Ineos sell one of their stakes, they cannot both play in European competitions unless one is in the Champions League and the other in the Conference League. Now, I remember this story doing the rounds a few months ago, and it was doing the rounds, and it sort of came and went, and everyone just ignored it and thought, right, okay, well, that doesn't even matter. And now it's popped up again. We'll have to wait and see what happens here, because it is a curious one. I would assume that if push came to shove and Sir Jim Ratcliffe had to make a decision over Manchester United and Nice, he'd choose Manchester United. I'd be very surprised if, and this is a big if he does have to make a decision, he says, right, well, United are just going to have to not play in Europe then. That's that. Because that would receive a massive backlash from the fans, and all sorts of questions will be asked about his ownership if one of the first things that happened under his part ownership, or whatever you wanted to call it, was United not being able to play in Europe. For starters, of course, we've got to qualify, and that's not a given. But if we did, and that was to stop us playing in Europe, that would be, I think there'd be outrage. But, and this is where I'm a bit confused, I don't get this, because, and by all means, get involved in the comments and the chat and let me know. Aren't Girona FC, who are top of the league at the minute, aren't they owned by the City Group? So how is that any different? And I want you to get involved, because I've been trying to look into this and I don't understand the difference between City owning Manchester City, obviously City Group, and Girona. I think they own a 47% stake in when I was looking at it online. How is that any different? If Girona keep doing what they're doing this season and stay at the top of the Liga and qualify for the Champions League, and City are going to qualify for the Champions League, unfortunately, I think that's a given, then wouldn't one of them have to drop out then? Why is that different from Manchester United and Ineos and Nice and all the rest of it? Let me know, because I'm not 100% sure. I'm a bit confused, as usual. Get involved in the chat in the comments and let me know exactly what is going on. Just on the Sir Jim Ratcliffe front, there's another story in the Evening News saying United are ready to follow Chelsea's recent model of hiring multiple sporting directors. This has come from TalkSport. I'm sorry here. I'm scraping a bit of the barrel here, aren't I, really, with some of these stories. Which says Ratcliffe is expected to oversee major change once his minority stake in United is ratified. We expect that to happen next week rather than this week. There were reports we were going to have it during the international break, which would have meant this week at the latest. Now the reports are that it's going to happen next week. I think Simon Stone and a few others tweeted that yesterday. It says Murtagh is expected to follow CEO Arnold out the exit door following several years of poor investment on the pitch. Chelsea owner Todd Burley hired two sporting directors, Paul Winstanley and Lawrence Stewart, to oversee $1 billion of spending in the last 3 windows, and Ratcliffe could do the same, with Paul Mitchell reportedly like to be joined by another transfer chief. Then goes on to say Dougie Freedman and Paolo Maldini have been linked with the role. I'm not sure what's going to happen in terms of the structure. 2 sporting directors might be a little bit of overkill. We'll have to wait and see. One thing I would say is I'd be very surprised if you use Chelsea as an example of what to follow or who to follow. Todd Burley's ownership of Chelsea has been almost an unmitigated disaster. he's wasted about £1 billion. They don't look any nearer to sorting themselves out and getting Champions League qualification than they did before they spent that £1 billion. I know they recently drew with Manchester City and beat Spurs, but I would hold my breath before I'd say, oh yeah, it's coming to fruition there. They're still languishing around the mid-table of the Premier League, and they've still got about 312 players on the books. So I'm not sure that you could say Chelsea is the benchmark for success, a club that went and spent 80 million quid on the likes of Mudryk and Fofana. So we'll see what happens there, but yeah, it's not one where I go, that's what we need to do. We need to follow the Chelsea model. Certainly not the Todd Boehly Chelsea model. Loads of stories doing the rounds this morning about a big clear out on the cards for Manchester United. I've seen it in the Independent, I've seen it in the Evening News, I've seen it basically everywhere. Lots of papers reporting that United are going to have a huge clear out over the next 2 windows. I said this in my news on Monday, that there's a lot of players that are going to be out of contracts in the summer, or in that sort of phase where they can have a year extension can kick in. The likes of Victor Lindelof, the likes of Anthony Martial, the likes of Hannibal Mejbri, Sofian Amrabat and Sergio Reguilon, of course, are on loan. Johnny Evans is a short-term loan deal. I think Tom Heaton's another one whose contract ends. The Independent and other papers are reporting that Anthony Martial could go. Sorry, not Anthony Martial. Jadon Sancho and Antony could go. Now that would be a bit of a surprise, the Antony one, because obviously he was bought under Erik ten Hag. Jadon Sancho was bought under the previous manager, the last but one manager, I should say, in Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, if we're not counting Michael Carrick. So Jadon Sancho doesn't surprise me, especially what's gone on with him and Erik ten Hag. Antony one, slightly more surprising in the sense that he was brought by the manager, but I've said this before and I'll say it again. I think Erik ten Hag might need to cut his losses with Antony. He's one of those where you might just have to hold your hands up and say, I got this one wrong. It happens. A manager comes in sometimes and makes a big signing and then has to say, you know what, he isn't the guy I thought he was. Pep did it at City with Claudio Bravo. Brought him in, replaced Joe Hart, wasn't the player he thought he was, and replaced him with Edison, and they haven't looked back. So I think that it might need to be the case with Erik ten Hag and Antony. Jadon Sancho, we can see what's happening there. Just on the outgoings front as well, there's a story, I think, in the coming out of the Turkish press. I think Sporks, whoever they are, have had it, saying that Galatasaray want to sign Donny van de Beek in January. That would be a good move for everyone concerned. Donny van de Beek hasn't really featured for Manchester United much. We thought he might get more of a chance now that his old manager, Erik ten Hag from Ajax, was coming over here. Hasn't happened. I know injuries have played the part as well, but Donny van de Beek's move to Manchester United has just been... It's been pretty shambolic, hasn't it, for a multitude of reasons. It hasn't worked out for him. I don't think Ole Gunnar Solskjaer wanted him in the first place. We've never really seen the best of him. He's not been anywhere near the player you saw at Ajax. We've tried him in several different roles. Hasn't worked out. Injuries, of course, have scuppered it. And yeah, I think it's just one of them where he just needs to move on, doesn't it? Talking of moving on as well, there's a report here, I think this might have come from the Brazilian press, that Casemiro could be going to Saudi Arabia. He thinks about a retirement in Saudi Arabia while waiting for a winning project at United that does not arrive. I think we've put this through the Google Translate from Portuguese, so it might be a little bit not quite make perfect grammatical sense. But the story here is that Casemiro is weighing up his options and he could end up going to Saudi Arabia. He's 31 years old. We know he's still on a long-term deal at Manchester United. I think he's got another 3.5 years left on his deal, or 3 years, left on his deal, with another option to extend, which I'd be very surprised if that kicked in. Could be going to Saudi Arabia. There's been question marks, haven't there, about Casemiro this season. Are we seeing the decline of Casemiro, or is he just in a bad bit of form? We'll have to wait and see how he gets on once he comes back into the side. But if he isn't playing well, if it is the decline of him, then he could go to Saudi Arabia, where the levels are a lot lower than the Premier League, let's be honest about it. And I know they've got Cristiano Ronaldo and a few other big name players, but it ain't the Premier League. Could get a lot of money there going to Saudi Arabia. Could be a decent option for him. We'll have to wait and see what happens on that front. But yeah, another one that makes a lot of sense if it's a big if Casemiro is on the decline. I'm not giving up on him yet. It could just be a little bit of a blip, and if he can get back to some of the form we saw sort of leading up to the Carabao Cup last season, then he could be a massive player for Manchester United. But I'm not so sure. I'll be honest with you. There's another story as well doing the rounds on Sky. It's Sir Jim Ratcliffe inside Ineos Chiefs takeover at Manchester United, including Erik ten Hag. They've done a bit of a report on what it's going to look like, how the takeover looks like, how it's going to affect sort of Erik ten Hag and all the rest of it. You might want to go and check that out. But we're still waiting, aren't we? We're still waiting for the takeover. We're still waiting to see what it's going to look like in terms of the 25% ownership. Who's going to come in as sporting director? Is it going to be Paul Mitchell? Is it going to be Dougie Freedman? Is it going to be Paolo Maldini? Is it going to be two of them, like this report was suggesting? Are we going to follow the Chelsea model? Or Is it going to be more of the same? We'll have to wait and see. We can expect, though, I think we can expect some form of major overhaul at the club, at the sporting side of the club under Sir Jim Ratcliffe. Almost every report we've seen on it says that Sir Jim Ratcliffe has looked at what's gone on at Manchester United and has been decidedly unimpressed and wants to overhaul it. And I think it needs it, doesn't it? Because the model we've had under the Glazers just ain't working since Sir Alex Ferguson retired. We just haven't been competitive at the levels you'd expect from Manchester United Football Club. We need a revamp, we need a rebuild, we need an overhaul, whatever you want to call it. Hopefully when Sir Jim Ratcliffe comes in, we can see that with a sporting director and maybe with a bit of restructuring, including a new CEO as well. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Make sure you are getting involved in the comments. Hit that like button as well. Going to be back later on with Off the Bar. Me, Howson, Joe, McCullough, we're all going to be on it. So subscribe to the channel. You don't want to miss out on any of that. I think it's starting to spit now. It's spitting. Get him in. So I'm going to leave it there. I've been Jay Motty. This has been The Paper Talk. Thanks for watching.